The train whistle screamed like a wounded animal as Katherine Rowan watched it depart, her heart sinking deeper with every inch of steel that disappeared into the distance. There she stood on the dusty platform of Kearney, Nebraska, in the summer of 1878, with nothing but her carpetbag, a torn ticket, and the sickening realization that her money purse was gone, likely lifted by the gentleman who'd accidentally bumped into her when boarding the eastbound train to Omaha. Katherine brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face, fighting back tears of frustration. 23 years old, alone, and now stranded at a remote station as the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. Her plans to reach her aunt's home in St. Louis were evaporating like water on hot sand. "Station closes in 10 minutes, miss," called the station master, an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Can't have you staying here overnight." "But sir, Katherine began, her voice catching. "My money was stolen. I have nowhere to go." The station master's face softened slightly, but he shook his head. "Sorry, miss, rules are rules. Kearney ain't the safest place after dark. You might try the boarding house in town, though Mrs. Wilson drives a hard bargain." Katherine clutched her carpetbag tighter. The few possessions she owned in the world were inside some clothes, a hairbrush, a locket containing a sketch of her parents, and a well-worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. Nothing of value to trade for a night's lodging. As the station master began locking up, Katherine stepped into the street, the grit of Nebraska soil crunching beneath her boots. Kearney was bustling with the usual afternoon traffic, merchants closing shops, cowboys stumbling in and out of saloons, and the occasional proper family hurrying home before sunset. "Excuse me," she attempted to stop a passing woman. "Could you direct me to?" But the woman hurried past without acknowledgement, pulling her children closer as if Katherine might contaminate them with her obvious desperation. After 3 more failed attempts at assistance, Katherine found herself at the edge of town, the weight of her situation becoming unbearable. The summer sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the plains. She sat on her bag, removed her bonnet, and allowed herself one moment of weakness as tears streamed down her face. "Trouble, miss," the deep voice startled her. Katherine hastily wiped her cheeks and looked up to see a tall man on horseback. He wore a weather-worn Stetson that shadowed intense blue eyes. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and a week's worth of beard covered his strong jaw. A working cowboy, not one of the preening town dandies. "I'm quite all right," she lied, straightening her back and replacing her bonnet. The man dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. His horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, nickered softly. "Pardon my forwardness, but you don't look all right." His voice had a slight drawl, but his words were clear and measured. "Patrick Harrington's the name." "Just rode in from the Diamond H Ranch." Katherine hesitated. Proper ladies didn't speak to strange men on the outskirts of town, but proper ladies also weren't supposed to be stranded without funds. "Katherine Rowan," she finally replied. I was robbed on the train. My money's gone and I have nowhere to stay tonight." Patrick Harrington studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, as if coming to a decision. "I'll take you home," he said simply. "I beg your pardon, to the ranch," he clarified. "My sister Emma's there." "You can stay until you sort things out. Can't leave a lady stranded, especially with night coming on." Katherine's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't know this man, but the alternatives flashed before her, sleeping in an alley, begging for charity or worse. "Why would you help a complete stranger?" she asked, wariness evident in her tone. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Because my mother would haunt me till my dying day if I rode past a woman in trouble." He gestured to his horse. "Rusty here's strong enough to carry us both to the ranch." "It's about an hour's ride." Katherine weighed her options quickly. The cowboy's eyes held no malice, only a straightforward honesty that was becoming rare in the world she knew. "Very well, Mr. Harrington, I accept your offer." "Patrick," he corrected, securing her carpetbag to his saddle. "Out here, formality just wastes breath." He helped her mount, his hands respectfully steady on her waist, then swung up behind her. Katherine tensed at the impropriety of their position, but as they rode away from Kearney, The rhythm of the horse's gait and the vastness of the Nebraska sky gradually eased her anxiety. "What brings you to Kearney?" Patrick asked after they'd left town behind. Katherine explained her journey, how after her parents' death from influenza in Chicago, she discovered their financial situation was precarious at best. She was traveling to her aunt's home in St. Louis, hoping for shelter and possibly employment as a teacher. "You're educated then?" There was no condescension in his tone, only interest. "Yes, my father believed women should have knowledge beyond household management." She smiled slightly. "He was considered quite progressive." Patrick nodded. "My mother was the same way, made sure Emma could read and cipher as well as any man." Comes in handy running the ranch books. As they rode, the landscape opened before them, rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers, the distant silhouette of cottonwoods marking a creek. Despite her circumstances, Katherine found herself entranced by the wild beauty of the land. "It's different from Chicago," she murmured. "Better," Patrick replied with certainty. "No smoke, no crowding. A person can breathe out here." The Diamond H Ranch appeared on the horizon as the sun touched the edge of the world, a sprawling main house with several outbuildings, corrals, and a barn. Smoke curled from the chimney, and lamplight glowed in the windows. "It's larger than I expected," Katherine admitted. "My father started with nothing but a claim and 20 head of cattle. By the time he died, we had one of the most successful operations in the county." There was quiet pride in Patrick's voice. "Emma and I run it now." As they approached, a woman emerged from the house. She was younger than Patrick by perhaps 3 years, with the same striking blue eyes and a practical brown dress. "Pat, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow." She called, then stopped short at the sight of Katherine. "Oh, you've brought company." Patrick dismounted and helped Katherine down, her legs stiff from the unaccustomed ride. "Emma, this is Miss Katherine Rowan. She had some trouble in town. Miss Rowan, my sister Emma." Emma's gaze was direct and assessing, but not unkind. After a moment, she smiled. "Well, you're just in time for supper. Come in before the biscuits get cold." The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, solid furniture, braided rugs, and shelves lined with books that surprised Katherine. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with a Dutch oven set in the coals. "Wash up and sit down," Emma directed, moving efficiently around the kitchen area. "I hope you like venison stew. Miguel brought a deer in yesterday." Over supper, Katherine explained her situation more fully. The Harrington siblings listened without interruption, exchanging glances occasionally. "You'll stay here until we can sort something out," Emma declared when Katherine finished. "The guest room hasn't been used since Christmas, but the linens are clean." "I couldn't impose, it's settled," Patrick said firmly. "First thing tomorrow, I'll ride into town and see the sheriff about your stolen money. Might be too late, but worth trying." Katherine was overwhelmed by their kindness. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Emma replied practically. "We help where we can." Later, as Katherine prepared for bed in the small but comfortable guest room, she heard Patrick and Emma talking in low voices. Though she couldn't make out the words, the tone was serious. She wondered what they were discussing, perhaps the burden of an unexpected guest. Morning brought the sounds and smells of ranch life: coffee brewing, bacon frying, men's voices as ranch hands prepared for the day's work. Katherine dressed quickly in her simplest dress, determined to make herself useful. In the kitchen, Emma was kneading bread dough while directing a young Mexican woman in Spanish. "Good morning," Katherine said tentatively. Emma looked up with a smile. "You're up early. This is Rosalinda, our cook's daughter." "Rosalinda, Miss Rowan." The young woman nodded shyly. "Buenos dias, señorita." "Patrick's already ridden to town," Emma explained. "Said he'd be back by noon. Hungry, over breakfast." Emma explained the workings of the ranch. The Diamond H employed 15 men full-time, with more hired during roundup and branding season. Besides cattle, they raised horses and maintained fields of wheat and corn. "It sounds like an enormous amount of work," Katherine commented. Emma nodded. "It is. Since Father died 5 years ago, we've managed, but..." She hesitated. "Well, we're considering some changes." Before Katherine could ask what changes, The door burst open and a small whirlwind entered a boy of about 10, with dirt-smudged cheeks and Patrick's blue eyes. Aunt Emma. Mr. Jennings says the new calf has a crooked leg. Can I help splint it? Emma sighed. Tommy, where are your manners? We have a guest. The boy skidded to a stop, noticing Katherine for the first time. Oh, sorry, madam. This is my nephew Thomas, Emma explained. My late brother John's son, Tommy. This is Miss Rowan. Thomas made a credible bow. Pleased to meet you, Miss Rowan, Katherine smiled. The pleasure is mine, Thomas. Tommy lives with us now, Emma added softly. His mother passed 3 winters ago. Katherine's heart went out to the boy. I understand. I lost my parents recently too. Thomas studied her with a child's direct curiosity. Does it stop hurting? Tommy. Emma admonished. It's all right, Katherine assured her. It becomes different, Thomas, less sharp but always there, like a friend who's moved far away but still writes letters. The boy considered this, then nodded solemnly. I like that explanation. Uncle Pat just says time heals, but that doesn't make sense to me. After breakfast, despite Emma's protests that guests shouldn't work, Katherine insisted on helping. She spent the morning assisting with household tasks, churning butter, mending shirts, and helping Rosalinda prepare vegetables for the midday meal. Through it all, she observed the rhythm of ranch life. Men came and went, reporting to Emma or the foreman, Mr. Jennings. Thomas flitted between chores and boyish adventures, always under someone's watchful eye. It was a world of hard work, but also of connection. Everyone had a purpose. Everyone belonged. Patrick returned as promised, his expression grim as he found Katherine in the garden harvesting beans with Rosalinda. No luck, I'm afraid, he said without preamble. Sheriff says by now whoever took your money is long gone, but he sent telegrams to neighboring towns just in case. Katherine nodded, having expected as much. Thank you for trying. There's more, Patrick continued. I checked with the station. Next eastbound train isn't due for 5 days. Katherine's heart sank. 5 more days of imposing on the Harringtons' hospitality. I can't ask you to keep me that long, she said quietly. Patrick's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. You didn't ask, we offered. Besides, Emma's already planning to put you to work teaching Tommy, says the boy needs feminine educational influence, whatever that means. Despite her situation, Katherine laughed. I'd be happy to help with Thomas's education. Good, that's settled then. Patrick tipped his hat and turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Emma says to tell you we're having company for supper, the Millers from the next ranch over. Caroline Miller's bringing her infamous peach pie. That evening, Katherine met the Millers, a boisterous family with 3 daughters who peppered her with questions about Chicago fashion and society. The youngest Miller girl, Abigail, was particularly enthralled with Katherine's descriptions of Lake Michigan. Is it truly so large you can't see the other side? She asked, blue eyes wide. Indeed it is, Katherine confirmed. On clear days, the water and sky blend together at the horizon. I've never even seen a proper river, Abigail sighed. Just creeks and cattle ponds. Mrs. Miller, a practical woman with work-worn hands, smiled indulgently. Perhaps someday, Abby. Throughout the meal, Katherine noticed Patrick watching her. Not inappropriately, but with an intensity that made her self-conscious. When she caught his eye, he didn't look away but gave a slight nod, as if confirming something to himself. Later, as the families gathered on the porch to enjoy the cooler evening air, Mr. Miller and Patrick discussed cattle prices while the women exchanged recipes and local news. You should stay for the Founders' Day celebration, Mrs. Miller told Katherine. It's only 10 days away. The whole county comes to Kearney for dancing, competitions, and the most spectacular fireworks west of the Mississippi. Oh, I couldn't possibly, Katherine began. What a fine idea, Emma interrupted. You should see a proper Nebraska celebration before heading east. Katherine glanced at Patrick, expecting him to object to such an extended stay, but he merely smiled. The Diamond H always has the largest booth at the fair. You'd be welcome to join us. Later that night, unable to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, Katherine stepped onto the porch. The night was alive with sounds: crickets chirping, the occasional lowing of cattle, and the soft nickering of horses in the corral. Couldn't sleep. Patrick's voice came from the darkness. Katherine started. You startled me. He emerged from the shadows, a cup of coffee in his hand. Sorry. I often come out here at night. Helps me think. About what? She asked, then blushed at her forwardness. Patrick leaned against the porch rail, considering the question. The ranch, the future. Changes coming whether we're ready or not. Emma mentioned something about changes. He nodded. The railroad's changing everything. Cattle drives are becoming less necessary. We need to adapt or get left behind. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the vast prairie night surrounding them. Why did you really help me, Mr. Harrington? Katherine asked suddenly. Patrick, he corrected automatically. Then, after a pause, honest answer, I'm not entirely sure. Something in your eyes, maybe, determination despite your circumstances. He shrugged. Or maybe I just couldn't stand the thought of leaving you there. His candor touched her. Well, whatever the reason, I'm grateful. How about you? He asked. What keeps you awake tonight? Katherine considered evading the question but found herself answering truthfully. Fear mostly, that I won't find my place in the world, that I'll always be dependent on the charity of others. There's no shame in accepting help when needed, Patrick said quietly. Everyone does sooner or later, even self-sufficient cowboys, she teased gently. His laugh was low and warm. Especially us. Every man at this ranch depends on others daily. One person alone can't survive out here. The next days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Mornings, Katherine taught Thomas reading, arithmetic, and history. The boy was bright but restless, preferring stories of exploration and adventure to grammar rules. Afternoons, she helped Emma with household management or accompanied her to check on the kitchen garden and henhouse. Evenings were for conversation, music from Emma's piano, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie sky. Patrick was often absent during daylight hours, overseeing ranch operations, but he joined them for meals and evening gatherings. Katherine found herself looking forward to his presence, to his quiet observations and occasional dry wit. On her fourth day at the ranch, Patrick invited her to ride with him to check the western pasture. I can't ride, she admitted, embarrassed. You rode with me from town, he pointed out. That was different. I was just sitting there. Patrick's eyes sparked with amusement. Then it's high time you learned. No one should live in Nebraska without knowing how to handle a horse. An hour later, Katherine found herself atop a gentle mare named Daisy with Patrick walking beside her, offering instructions as they circled the corral. Relax your back, he advised. Move with her, not against her. Katherine gripped the saddle horn tightly. I'm trying. You're thinking too much. Feel the rhythm. Without warning, he swung up behind her, his arms reaching around to take the reins. Like this. His body was warm against her back, solid and reassuring. His hands, rough from work but gentle in their guidance, positioned hers correctly on the reins. There. Now you're getting it. Gradually, Katherine relaxed into the movement, finding the natural cadence of the horse's gait. By the time Patrick dismounted, she was smiling with newfound confidence. Ready to try on your own? He asked. She nodded, and he stepped back, watching as she guided Daisy in increasingly larger circles. When she finally brought the horse to a stop in front of him, his smile was approving. You're a natural, Katherine. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and something in his tone made her heart flutter unexpectedly. That evening, as Katherine helped Emma prepare supper, the younger woman broached a subject that had obviously been on her mind. You know, Emma began casually, we could use a teacher here permanently. Katherine looked up from the potatoes she was peeling. What do you mean? Most ranching families can't send their children to town for schooling, especially during winter. We've talked about establishing a small school at the Diamond H for our Hands children and neighbors. Emma smiled. After seeing you with Tommy, I think you'd be perfect for it. Katherine was stunned, but my aunt insisted. Louis, would she be offended if you wrote explaining you'd found employment? Emma asked practically. We could offer room, board, and a fair salary. The idea was tempting. Already, Katherine had come to appreciate the ranch's rhythms, the open spaces, the sense of purpose that pervaded daily life. I'd need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Emma agreed readily. Just know the offer stands. That night, Katherine lay awake considering possibilities she'd never imagined. She'd always seen her future in terms of cities and established society. Yet here was an alternative path, teaching on the frontier, helping shape young minds far from conventional schoolrooms. And there was Patrick. She couldn't deny that his presence factored into her thoughts. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet competence with which he handled every challenge, his unexpected gentleness with his nephew, all had combined to create an impression that lingered in her mind. The next morning, Katherine joined Patrick on the porch where he was repairing a bridle. "Emma mentioned the school idea," she said without preamble. Patrick nodded, not looking up from his work. "It's been a plan for some time, just needed the right teacher. And you think I'm right for it?" Now he did look up, his blue eyes serious. "I do. Tommy's learned more in 4 days with you than in months with old Mr. Ferguson in town. It would be very different from what I expected for my life," Katherine admitted. Patrick set aside the bridle. "Life rarely follows our expectations, in my experience. Is that what happened to you? Life took unexpected turns," a shadow crossed his face. "You could say that. Always thought I'd ranch alongside my brother John. Then the war came. I joined up in '63, fought at Chickamauga, Chattanooga. When I came back in '65, John was dead from typhoid, and Father was running the ranch alone." "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. "About your brother." "It was a long time ago," Patrick replied, though his eyes suggested the wound wasn't entirely healed. "Point is, we adapt, find new paths." Before Katherine could respond, a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching at speed. Patrick stood, shading his eyes against the morning sun. "That's Miguel's boy," he said, tension evident in his voice. "Riding too fast for good news." The rider, a youth of about 16, pulled his lathered horse to a stop at the porch steps. "Mr. Harrington," he gasped. "Fire in the south pasture. Mr. Jennings says it's moving fast with the wind." Patrick was already moving. "Ring the bell, get every man who can ride." He turned to Katherine. "Stay with Emma. If the wind shifts, you may need to prepare to evacuate." Within minutes, the ranch erupted into organized chaos. Men mounted horses, loaded wagons with water barrels, grabbed shovels and wet blankets. Patrick, now in a different mode, entirely commanding, decisive directed operations from the center of the yard. As he prepared to ride out, he caught Katherine's eye across the commotion. For a moment, something passed between them: concern, respect, and something deeper neither was ready to name. Then he was gone, leading a column of riders toward a distant smudge of smoke on the horizon. The next hours were tense. Emma, practical as always, put Katherine and Rosalinda to work preparing food and coffee for the returning men, boiling water for potential burns, and packing essentials in case evacuation became necessary. Thomas, forbidden from joining the firefighting, paced the porch anxiously, watching the smoke cloud grow and shift with the wind. "Uncle Pat will stop it," he declared with a child's faith. "He always does." Katherine put an arm around his shoulders. "I'm sure he will." It was nearly sunset when the men began returning, exhausted, smoke blackened, but victorious. The fire had been contained before reaching the main grazing lands or the creek that provided water for the cattle. Patrick was among the last to return, his clothes singed, face streaked with soot. He dismounted stiffly, accepting a cup of water from Emma with a nod of thanks. "Everyone accounted for?" Emma asked anxiously. "All safe," Patrick confirmed. "2 men with minor burns being treated at Miguel's camp. Will need to move the south herd tomorrow, though. Grazing's gone." His eyes found Katherine, who stood uncertainly nearby. Something in his expression softened. "Sorry for the excitement, Miss Rowan. I'm just glad everyone's safe," she replied sincerely. Later, after the men had been fed and most had collapsed into exhausted sleep, Katherine found Patrick alone on the porch. He'd cleaned up but still moved gingerly, evidence of the day's exertion. "You should rest," she said, offering a cup of coffee. "Too wound up," he admitted, accepting the cup. "Always takes time to settle after something like that." Katherine nodded, understanding. "You were impressive today. The way you organized everything, kept everyone calm." Patrick shrugged. "Just doing what needed doing." "No," Katherine insisted. "It was more than that. Those men follow you because they respect you, not just because you're their employer." He seemed almost embarrassed by her praise. Ranch life teaches you to depend on each other. Today it was fire, tomorrow it could be flood or rustlers or 100 other things. Is it always this dangerous? She asked. Patrick smiled faintly. Having second thoughts about that teaching position, actually no, Katherine admitted. If anything, today convinced me this is a community worth being part of. Something flickered in Patrick's eyes, surprise, followed by what might have been pleasure. Does that mean you're considering Emma's offer? I am. Katherine took a deep breath. In fact, I've decided to accept it, at least provisionally. I'll write to my aunt explaining the situation. Patrick was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. The children will benefit greatly from your teaching. And what about you, Mr. Harrington? Katherine asked, surprising herself with her boldness. How do you feel about having me stay on? His gaze met hers directly. I think you know I approve, Miss Rowan. The air between them seemed charged suddenly, possibilities opening that neither had acknowledged before. But before either could speak further, Emma called from inside, breaking the moment. The next morning brought preparations for the Founders' Day celebration in Kearney. The entire ranch was involved preparing food, readying displays of crafts and ranch products, repairing the wagon that would transport everything to town. Katherine threw herself into the work, helping Emma bake pies and prepare preserves for the Diamond HTKS booth. As they worked, she composed a letter to her aunt in St. Louis, explaining her decision to remain in Nebraska. You're sure about this? Emma asked when Katherine shared her decision. Teaching here won't be like in a city school. Conditions will be primitive at times. I'm sure, Katherine replied, surprising herself with her certainty. There's something about this place, these people. She trailed off, unable to fully articulate the sense of belonging she'd begun to feel. Emma's knowing smile suggested she understood what Katherine couldn't say. Well, we're fortunate to have you, especially Patrick. Katherine felt herself blushing. I don't know what you mean, don't you? Emma laughed softly. My brother hasn't looked at a woman the way he looks at you since before the war. Before Katherine could respond to this revelation, Thomas burst in, excited about a new colt born in the night, and the moment for confidences passed. The day before the Founders' Day celebration, Patrick invited Katherine to ride with him to check a line of fencing, a real task this time, not just a riding lesson. After 5 days of practice, she felt confident enough to accept. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the vast Nebraska landscape spreading around them, rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers, the distant shimmer of heat above the plains. It's beautiful, Katherine said finally. Different from what I'm used to, but beautiful in its own way. It gets in your blood, Patrick agreed. The space, the freedom. Is that why you stayed? After the war, I mean, you could have gone anywhere. Patrick considered this. Partly, but mostly it was responsibility, to my father, to Emma, to Tommy after John died. You've carried a lot, Katherine observed. He shrugged. Everyone does, in their own way. They dismounted by a creek to rest the horses. Patrick checked a section of fence while Katherine sat on a sun-warmed rock watching him work. His movements were economical, practiced a man completely at home in his environment. What about you? He asked unexpectedly, glancing up from his task. What made you decide to stay here? Really? Katherine considered her answer carefully. At first, necessity, but now, I think it's possibility. In Chicago, my path seemed predetermined to find a position, perhaps eventually marry a respectable businessman, live a conventional life. She gestured at the open landscape. Here it feels like I can define my own future. Patrick nodded slowly. That's what the West offers at its best. A chance to build something new. Is that what you want? Something new, their eyes met, and Katherine felt that same charge in the air between them. Patrick straightened, taking a step toward her. I never thought I'd want changes to the life I've built, he said quietly, until recently. Before Katherine could ask what had changed, a distant rumble of thunder interrupted the moment. Patrick glanced at the horizon, where dark clouds were gathering with surprising speed. Storm's coming. We should head back. They rode quickly, but the storm moved faster. The wind picked up, driving dust before it, and the first fat raindrops began to fall when they were still 20 minutes from the ranch. There's a line shack ahead, Patrick called over the rising wind. "We'll shelter there." The lined shack proved to be a small, sturdy cabin used by cowboys watching the distant herds. Patrick ushered Katherine inside just as the heavens opened, rain lashing down in blinding sheets. The interior was simple but clean: a small stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed with a wool blanket, and shelves stocked with provisions. "We keep all the lined shacks supplied," Patrick explained, lighting the stove. "Never know when you might need shelter in a hurry." Katherine stood awkwardly, dripping on the plank floor, suddenly aware of their isolation and the impropriety of the situation. Patrick seemed to realize it at the same time. "I'll check on the horses," he said, heading back into the deluge. Left alone, Katherine removed her wet jacket and hung it near the stove. Her dress was damp but not soaked through. She found a tin of coffee on the shelf and set water to boil, wanting to be useful. When Patrick returned, rain streaming from his hat and coat, the small space filled with the aroma of fresh coffee. He stopped in the doorway, taking in the domestic scene. "You found the coffee," he said, removing his dripping hat. "It seemed the least I could do," Katherine replied with a small smile. "Your poor horses, under the lean-to, out of the worst of it." He hung his coat by the door and accepted the cup she offered. "Thank you." They sat at the small table, the storm raging outside, creating an intimate bubble within the shack. For a time, they talked of practical things: the celebration tomorrow, plans for the school, ranch operations. "You know," Katherine said eventually, "you never finished telling me what changed." "About wanting something new." Patrick's eyes held hers. "I think you know." "I'd rather not presume," she replied softly. He set down his cup, his expression serious. "5 days ago, I found a woman stranded at the station. I offered help because it was the right thing to do. I didn't expect." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I didn't expect to find someone who fits so naturally into this life, into my life." Katherine's heart quickened. "Patrick, you don't have to say anything," he continued quickly. "It's too soon, I know that. You've only just decided to stay. There's time to see where things might lead." His restraint, his consideration for her position, touched Katherine deeply. On impulse, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Thank you," she said simply. They remained like that, connected by touch and unspoken possibility, until the storm began to subside. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in thought about the shift in their relationship. At the ranch house, Emma took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly but said nothing. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the Founders' Day celebration. The entire ranch community loaded into wagons for the trip to Kearney, spirits high. The town was transformed: streets decorated with bunting, a bandstand erected in the square, booths and tables laden with goods from surrounding farms and ranches. Children ran excitedly between attractions, and the air hummed with music and conversation. The Diamond H. booth, manned by Emma and several ranch wives, quickly became popular for its preserves, baked goods, and handcrafted items. Katherine helped serve, enjoying the festive atmosphere and the chance to meet more of the community. Patrick was frequently pulled away for conversations with other ranchers and town officials, but his eyes often sought Katherine across the crowd. When their gazes met, a private understanding passed between them. In the afternoon, competitions began: horseshoe pitching, shooting contests, pie judging, and races for the children. Thomas won the boys' sack race, beaming with pride as Katherine cheered him on. As evening approached, lanterns were lit and tables arranged for the community supper. Katherine found herself seated between Patrick and the mayor's wife, engaged in conversation about plans for the school. "We've needed a proper teacher for years," Mrs. Mayor, as everyone called her, declared. "These children deserve education, frontier or not." "I couldn't agree more," Katherine replied. "Every child should have the opportunity to learn, regardless of circumstance." Patrick's knee pressed gently against hers under the table, a silent gesture of support and something more. After supper came dancing. A fiddle band struck up lively tunes and couples filled the square. Katherine watched, tapping her foot to the music until Patrick appeared at her side. "May I have this dance, Miss Rowan?" he asked formally. though his eyes held a warmth that belied his proper tone. "I'd be honored, Mr. Harrington," she replied, placing her hand in his. He led her onto the makeshift dance floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. They moved together as if they'd danced 100 times before, finding a natural rhythm that matched the music and something deeper between them. "Everyone's watching us," Katherine murmured, noticing the glances and smiles. "Let them," Patrick replied simply. "I don't mind if you don't." As darkness fell completely, the promised fireworks began brilliant bursts of color against the velvet Nebraska sky. The crowd gathered on blankets to watch, exclaiming at particularly spectacular displays. Katherine found herself seated between Patrick and Thomas, the boy's excitement infectious as he pointed out each new explosion of light. Patrick's arm rested lightly behind her, not quite touching but suggesting protection, connection. In that moment, surrounded by her new community, Katherine felt a certainty settle in her heart. This unexpected detour, being stranded at her remote station, had led her not to disaster but to possibility, to a future she could never have imagined in Chicago. As the final fireworks illuminated the sky, Patrick turned to her, his face painted in shifting colors from above. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Yes," she replied truthfully. "I am." The weeks following the Founders' Day celebration were filled with purpose as Katherine settled into her role as teacher at the Diamond H. Emma helped convert an unused storage building into a schoolroom, complete with a small blackboard, desks crafted by the ranch carpenter, and books ordered from Denver. By mid-August, Katherine had 8 students: Thomas, 3 children of ranch hands, and 4 from neighboring properties. Ages ranged from 6 to 14, creating challenges in designing appropriate lessons, but Katherine thrived on the work. Her relationship with Patrick evolved gradually. Propriety still governed their interactions, especially in public, but private moments, conversations on the porch after supper, rides to check the property boundaries, quiet evenings reading by the fire deepened their connection. One evening in late August, Patrick invited Katherine to ride to a special place he wanted to show her. They set out as the workday ended, heading west into the setting sun. "Where are we going?" Katherine asked, confident now on her mare. "You'll see," Patrick replied with an uncharacteristic smile. "It's worth the ride." They crested a gentle hill just as the sun touched the horizon. Below them stretched a small valley sheltered by cottonwoods, with a clear stream running through its center. Wildflowers dotted the grass in patches of color, and the last sunlight turned the scene golden. "Patrick, it's beautiful," Katherine breathed. They dismounted, letting the horses graze while they walked to the stream's edge. "My father claimed this land too, though we've never grazed it heavily," Patrick explained. "He always said it was too pretty to fill with cattle." "He was right," Katherine agreed, bending to touch the cool water. "It feels special somehow." Patrick watched her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about building here." Katherine looked up, surprised. "Building what?" "A home." He met her eyes directly. "My own home, separate from the main ranch house." The implications hung in the air between them. "I see," Katherine said carefully. "Any particular reason?" Patrick took a deep breath. "I think you know the reason, Katherine." He took her hand gently. "These past weeks, having you at the ranch in my life, it's changed everything." Katherine's heart raced. "Patrick, I'm not asking anything yet," he assured her quickly. "It's still too soon, I know that. But I wanted you to know my intentions, that what I feel for you is serious and lasting." Katherine looked around at the beautiful valley, imagining a home there, their home, perhaps, and felt a surge of emotion. "Thank you for showing me this place," she said softly, "and for trusting me with your thoughts." Patrick's hand tightened on hers. "Katherine, but she placed a finger gently on his lips. "Not yet. You're right that it's soon. Let's give ourselves time to be certain." He nodded, respecting her wisdom even as his eyes revealed his feelings. They returned to the ranch as stars appeared, a new understanding between them, unspoken but profound. September brought cooler temperatures and the start of harvest season. The Diamond H hummed with activity as wheat was cut, corn gathered, and preparations made for winter. Katherine's school flourished. Her students, initially shy or resistant, had warmed to her methods and enthusiasm. Even the oldest boy, 14-year-old James Wilson, who had initially declared school a waste of good working time, now arrived early to discuss books Katherine had lent him. One crisp morning, as Katherine wrote arithmetic problems on the blackboard, Emma appeared in the schoolhouse doorway. "Katherine, could I borrow you for a moment?" Her expression was troubled. "Outside," Emma explained. "Telegram from St. Louis. Your aunt's taken ill. The doctor thinks it's serious." Katherine's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh no, when did this come?" "Just now. Patrick rode to town this morning and brought it back." Emma hesitated. "He's already making arrangements for you to travel. The eastbound train comes through tomorrow morning." Katherine's mind raced. Aunt Margaret was her only remaining family if her condition was truly serious. "I need to go to her," she said, decision made. "Can you manage the school while I'm away?" Emma nodded. "Of course. Don't worry about anything here." That evening, as Katherine packed her carpet bag, the same one she'd arrived with months before Patrick knocked at her door. "Come in," she called, folding a dress. He entered, holding an envelope. "Your ticket to St. Louis," he said, placing it on the dresser. "And—" he hesitated before setting down a smaller envelope, "some money for expenses. I won't hear arguments," he added as she began to protest. "You can consider it an advance on your salary if it makes you feel better." Katherine's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you." Patrick stood awkwardly for a moment. "Katherine, he began, then seemed to think better of it. "I hope your aunt recovers quickly." "So do I," she replied, the weight of pending separation suddenly heavy between them. "Will you?" Patrick cleared his throat. "Will you come back?" The question held so much more than its simple words. Katherine met his gaze steadily. "Yes," she promised, "I'll come back." The relief in his eyes was palpable. "Then I'll be here, waiting." The journey to St. Louis seemed interminable, though objectively Katherine knew it was faster than most travel had been even a decade earlier. The train rolled eastward through Nebraska, Iowa, and Illinois, the landscape changing from open prairie to increasingly settled farmland and eventually to the outskirts of the growing city. Katherine's mind alternated between worry for her aunt and thoughts of who she'd left behind. In just a few months, Patrick Harrington had become central to her life in ways she'd never anticipated. The prospect of returning to city life, even temporarily, now seemed strange rather than familiar. St. Louis proved overwhelming after the relative quiet of the Diamond H. Streets crowded with carriages and people, buildings pressed close together. The constant noise and bustle all felt foreign now rather than normal. Her aunt's house, once a symbol of stability and refinement, now seemed confining with its formal parlor and rigid social rules. Margaret Davenport, Katherine's mother's sister, was indeed seriously ill with pneumonia, but showing signs of recovery by the time Katherine arrived. "Katherine, my dear," the older woman greeted weakly from her sick bed. "You came all this way, from Nebraska of all places." Katherine took her aunt's frail hand. "Of course I came. You're my family." In the days that followed, as her aunt's conditions slowly improved, Katherine found herself explaining her new life at the Diamond H, the school, the community, and gradually Patrick, a rancher. Aunt Margaret raised her eyebrows. "Your mother always hoped you'd marry a doctor or perhaps a lawyer." "Patrick is a good man," Katherine replied simply. "Honorable, hardworking kind." Her aunt studied her face. "You love him," she stated rather than asked. Katherine hadn't allowed herself to use that word, even in her thoughts, but hearing it spoken aloud crystallized her feelings. "Yes," she admitted. "I believe I do," Aunt Margaret sighed. "Well, Nebraska certainly wasn't what I envisioned for you, but your happiness matters more than location." She squeezed Katherine's hand. "Your mother would say the same." This blessing, unexpected but deeply appreciated, lifted a weight from Katherine's heart. As September turned to October, Aunt Margaret's recovery progressed. Katherine wrote regularly to Emma, receiving news of the ranch and her students, and a brief, heartfelt note from Patrick expressing his hopes for her aunt's health and his anticipation of her return. St. Louis Society, meanwhile, made efforts to reclaim Katherine. Invitations arrived for teas, musicales, and dinners. Several eligible bachelors paid calls, clearly encouraged by mutual acquaintances who assumed Katherine was back permanently. One such caller, Dr. William Thornton, was particularly persistent. Handsome, well-established, and from a prominent family, he represented exactly the future Katherine had once envisioned for herself. "Miss Rowan, I hope I'm not being too forward," he said during one afternoon visit, "but I've greatly enjoyed our conversations. Might I call on you again tomorrow evening? The symphony is performing Beethoven's Fifth." Katherine hesitated. Dr. Thornton was everything she should want: cultured, educated, financially secure. Yet all she could think was how different he was from Patrick, with his straightforward manner and quiet strength. "I'm flattered, Dr. Thornton," she replied carefully, "but I should tell you that my heart is engaged elsewhere." His disappointment was evident but graciously expressed. After he left, Aunt Margaret, who had observed the exchange from her chair by the fire, nodded approvingly. "You've changed, Katherine. 6 months ago, you would have accepted his invitation." Katherine smiled. "6 months ago, I hadn't met Patrick Harrington." By late October, Aunt Margaret was well enough that Katherine could consider returning to Nebraska. The prospect filled her with anticipation, though winter travel presented concerns. "You should wait until spring," Aunt Margaret advised. "Winter journeys are unpredictable at best, dangerous at worst." "I can't wait that long," Katherine admitted. "I have students counting on me, and," she hesitated, "other reasons." Her aunt's knowing smile acknowledged the unspoken motivation. "Then at least wait until the first week of November. The weather should still be manageable then." Katherine agreed, sending a telegram to the Diamond H with her expected return date. The reply came the next day, a simple message that warmed her heart. "All well here. Awaiting your return, PH." On November 3, 1878, Katherine boarded the westbound train, her carpetbag now supplemented with a trunk containing books for the school, gifts for Emma and Thomas, and a few new dresses her aunt had insisted on providing. "Remember," Aunt Margaret had said at their parting, "you always have a home here if needed, but I hope you find happiness where your heart is leading you." The journey west felt entirely different from her eastbound trip, filled with anticipation rather than anxiety. As the landscape transformed from settled farmland back to open prairie, Katherine felt a growing sense of rightness, of returning where she belonged. The train pulled into Kearney station on a clear, cold November afternoon. Katherine gathered her belongings, heart racing as she stepped onto the platform, the same place where her adventure had begun months earlier. Her eyes scanned the station, looking for a familiar face, and found it immediately. Patrick stood by the station building, tall and steady, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the crowded platform. Then Patrick moved toward her, purpose in every stride. "Katherine," he said simply when he reached her, her name carrying all the emotion of their separation. "Patrick," she replied, suddenly shy despite the letters they'd exchanged. He took her carpetbag, his hand brushing hers. "Welcome home." The word home settled in her heart, perfect and true. They loaded her belongings into the ranch wagon. Patrick had brought Rusty too, the chestnut gelding that had carried them both on that first journey to the Diamond H. "Emma wanted to come," Patrick explained as they pulled away from the station, "but Tommy's down with a cold. She sends her love and promises a special supper tonight." As they traveled the now familiar road toward the ranch, Patrick filled her in on developments during her absence: new calves born, preparations for winter, progress on the line shack near the stream he'd shown her, which was being expanded for more permanent use. "And your students ask daily when Miss Rowan is returning," he added with a smile. "Even James Wilson, though he tries to hide his interest." Katherine laughed, feeling the tension of travel and separation melting away. "I've missed them, all of them." She glanced at Patrick. "I've missed you." His hands tightened on the reins. "Katherine, wait," she interrupted gently. "Could we stop for a moment?" Surprised, Patrick brought the wagon to a halt. They were at the crest of a hill, the Diamond H visible in the distance, smoke curling from the chimney against the November sky. Katherine turned to face him fully. "I've had a lot of time to think these past weeks about what I want where I belong." Patrick's expression was carefully controlled, but his eyes revealed his tension. "And what conclusions did you reach?" he asked quietly. "That home isn't a place," she said simply. It's where your heart is. She took a deep breath. My heart is here, Patrick, with this land, with your family, with you. The control in his expression broke, replaced by such naked hope and joy that Catherine's own emotions welled up in response. I love you, she continued, the words finally spoken aloud. I think I have since that day by the stream when you showed me your dreams for the future. Patrick reached for her hands, holding them as if they were precious. Katherine Rowan, I've loved you since I found you at that station. Everything since then, every day, every conversation has only deepened what I feel. He released her hands only to reach into his coat pocket, producing a small velvet box. I got this in Omaha last month, been carrying it ever since, waiting. Inside was a ring not ostentatious but beautifully crafted with a small diamond flanked by sapphires. Reminded me of your eyes, Patrick said softly. I know it's not as fine as what city gentlemen might offer, it's perfect, Katherine interrupted, her vision blurring with tears. It's absolutely perfect. Patrick took her hand again, his own slightly unsteady. Katherine Rowan, will you marry me, build a life with me here? Yes, she answered without hesitation. Yes, with all my heart. He slid the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise and a beginning, deepening as they both realized this was no longer a dream but reality. When they finally continued toward the ranch, the future stretched before them like the Nebraska horizon, vast, sometimes challenging, but filled with possibility and promise. Emma's joy at their news was immediate and wholehearted. Finally, she exclaimed, hugging them both. I was beginning to think you'd never ask her, Patrick. Thomas, recovering from his cold, was equally enthusiastic. Does this mean you'll stay forever, Miss Rowan? He asked. Yes, Katherine assured him, feeling Patrick's arm around her waist. And soon I'll be Aunt Katherine to you. That evening, after Thomas had gone to bed, the three adults sat by the fire, discussing plans for the future. The wedding would be in spring, when travel was easier for Aunt Margaret and other guests. Patrick would continue converting the line shack into a proper home, with additions planned for the coming years. And the school? Emma asked. Will you continue teaching? Of course, Katherine replied firmly. Those children need education, and I've grown to love teaching them. Patrick smiled, his arm around her shoulders. We'll build the new house with a schoolroom attached. As the community grows, eventually we'll need a proper schoolhouse, but this will serve for now. The winter of 1878-1879 passed in a blur of activity and anticipation. Katherine resumed teaching, her students welcoming her return with enthusiasm. Preparations for spring planting and calving occupied the ranch hands. Patrick divided his time between ranch operations and work on their future home, often returning late, exhausted but satisfied with progress. In the evenings, Katherine and Patrick stole moments together, planning their life, sharing stories of their pasts, building the foundation of understanding that would support their marriage. Christmas brought a festive atmosphere to the Diamond H. The house was decorated with pine boughs and ribbons, presents were exchanged, and a community dinner welcomed neighboring ranchers and hands. Katherine, wearing her engagement ring proudly, was introduced formally as Patrick's fiancée, receiving warm congratulations from the extended ranch family. January brought heavy snow, temporarily isolating the ranch. During this enforced quiet time, Katherine started a tradition of evening readings by the fire, novels, poetry, newspapers from Omaha when available. Ranch hands would often join the family, grateful for entertainment during the long winter nights. February's thaw allowed travel again. Patrick took Katherine to see the progress on their house, the basic structure complete, interior work continuing as weather permitted. It will be ready by our wedding, he promised, leading her through the rooms larger than the original line shack, but still modest by city standards. It's wonderful, Katherine assured him, already envisioning their life, their children playing by the stream, meals at the sturdy table Patrick had crafted himself. Years unfolding in this peaceful valley. March brought preparations for spring roundup and the wedding scheduled for early April. Aunt Margaret arrived by train, accompanied by two friends Katherine had known in Chicago. Their presence bridged her past and future in a way that felt right and complete. The wedding day dawned clear and mild Nebraska, offering its best spring weather as a gift. The ceremony took place at the Diamond H, with the ranch community gathered to witness. Katherine wore a gown of cream silk that Aunt Margaret had insisted on providing, while Patrick looked uncharacteristically formal in a new suit. The local minister conducted the simple service. Katherine and Patrick had written their own vows promises not only of love and fidelity but of partnership, of building something lasting together. "I take you, Katherine Rowan, as my wife," Patrick's strong voice carried across the assembled guests. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you through whatever life brings, to build our home and our future together as equal partners in all things." Katherine's eyes shimmered with tears as she responded, "I take you, Patrick Harrington, as my husband. I promise to love you, support you, and face life's challenges at your side, to make our home a place of warmth and welcome, and to journey with you wherever our path leads." Their kiss, sealing these promises, was met with cheers from the gathered community. The celebration continued into the evening, food and drink flowing freely, music and dancing under the stars, the Diamond H showing its most festive face. As night deepened, the newlyweds slipped away to their new home in the valley. Patrick had arranged everything: lamps lit, fire burning in the hearth, flowers on the table Emma had helped prepare. The intimacy of finally being alone, of beginning their life together, was both exhilarating and profound. Later, as they lay together in the quiet of their new home, Patrick traced the line of Katherine's cheek with gentle fingers. "Happy Mrs. Harrington?" he asked softly. Katherine smiled at her new name. "Completely, and you?" "More than I ever thought possible." He pulled her closer. "When I found you at that station, I only meant to help a stranded traveler. I never imagined that you were finding your wife," Katherine finished. "That I was finding my future," he corrected. "Everything I didn't know I was missing." Katherine nestled against him, marveling at the journey that had brought her here, from a Chicago childhood to a Nebraska ranch, from a stranded traveler to a wife and teacher, from uncertainty to profound belonging. "I'm glad I was stranded," she murmured. "I'm glad you were the one who found me." Patrick's arms tightened around her. "I would have found you somehow," he said with quiet certainty. "If not at that station, then somewhere else. Some paths are meant to cross." In the years that followed, the Harrington Ranch flourished under Patrick's management, adapting to changing times as the frontier gradually transformed into settled territory. Katherine's school expanded, eventually moving to a proper schoolhouse built on Diamond H land, but serving the wider community. Their first child, a son named William, arrived in the spring of 1880, followed by a daughter, Elizabeth, in 1882. The house in the valley grew with their family additional rooms, a larger kitchen, bookshelves filled with volumes for every interest. Emma eventually married a widowed rancher from a neighboring property, combining their lands and resources. Thomas grew into a capable young man who shared his uncle's love for ranching and his aunt's appreciation for education. Through it all, the challenges of frontier life, the joys of family, the gradual transformation of Nebraska from territory to established state, Katherine and Patrick's partnership remained the foundation of their world. Different in background but aligned in values, they built a life that honored both their dreams. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Patrick surprised Katherine with a journey not east to the cities she'd left behind, but west to the mountains, a landscape she'd never seen. They stood together on a high ridge, the Great Plains behind them, the Rocky Mountains before them, the vast tapestry of their country spread at their feet. "Any regrets?" Patrick asked, his arm around her waist, his face weathered by years of sun and wind, but his eyes as clear and direct as when they'd first met. Katherine looked at him, this man who had found her when she was lost, who had offered home when she had none, who had built a life with her based on respect and deep love. "Not one," she replied truthfully. "Every step, every choice led exactly where I was meant to be." The setting sun gilded their faces as they turned back toward home. Toward the future, they continued to build together a future that had begun on a dusty platform when a stranded woman with no money met a cowboy who offered more than just a ride home.